The Battle Inside You, Freud's three-part model of the mind. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever done something impulsive, only to regret it a moment later? Have you ever found yourself torn between what you wanted and what you knew was right? Have you ever felt at war with yourself? If so, you're not broken. You're not confused. You're human. And you are exactly the kind of person Freud was trying to understand. At the heart of Freud's theory of the mind is a radical and discomforting insight. You are not one. You are many. Freud didn't see the mind as a single rational unit. He saw it as a conflict zone, a place where desire, morality, and reality clash constantly. The tidy illusion of a unified self? Just that, an illusion. To map this chaos, Freud introduced what would become his most iconic model, the division of the mind into id, ego, and superego. This isn't just theory. It's the architecture of your inner life. In this talk, we're going to explore how Freud constructed this model, why he thought we're always in internal conflict, and what happens when the balance collapses. More than that, we'll ask what this means for free will, for ethics, for the modern idea of selfhood. And I'll tell you now, Freud's answer is as brilliant as it is unnerving. Let's begin in the dark, where all things start, with the id. Freud described the id as the oldest part of the mind, both in terms of evolution and individual development. It's with you from the moment you're born, before you learn to speak, before you know your name. The id is there. What does it want? Everything. It is pure drive, hunger, thirst, lust, aggression. It operates on the pleasure principle, which says, if it feels good, do it. Now, without delay, without compromise. The id doesn't understand no. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't plan. It simply demands. In fact, it's not even conscious. You cannot access your id in thought, but you feel it, in the impulse to lash out, in the craving that overrides reason, in the instinct to possess, consume, dominate. Freud often compared the id to a seething cauldron of energy, boiling beneath the surface, ready to overflow. Sound dramatic? Think of a tantruming child, or a jealous lover, or a mob. The id lives in them all. But here's the paradox. Without the id, there is no passion, no will to live, no creativity. It is the engine of human motivation. The danger is not in having an id. The danger is in letting it drive. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we meet the superego. If the id is want, the superego is should. Freud saw the superego as the internalized voice of authority. It develops as a child learns social rules, what's allowed, what's forbidden, what earns love, and what invites shame. The superego carries two key functions. The conscience punishes misbehavior with guilt and anxiety. The ego ideal rewards good behavior with pride and self-respect. In a sense, the superego is like having your parents, your teachers, your culture, and your God, all whispering in your ear at once. But it's not a calm, rational advisor. The superego is often severe, unrealistic, perfectionistic. It doesn't negotiate either. It demands purity. You know this voice. It says, you shouldn't eat that. You should have tried harder. You're not good enough. For some, it becomes a tyrant. For others, a guiding star. For most, it's both. And like the id, much of the superego is unconscious. You may not even realize who or what it is echoing. You just feel the weight of it. Freud believed that the superego is born out of the Oedipus complex, when the child turns aggression toward the father inward, converting it into a moral compass. Even if that theory sounds far-fetched, the idea that our morality is built from early emotional experiences still resonates today. In Freud's model, the superego is what civilizes us, but at a cost. Caught in the middle is the ego. The ego is you as you experience yourself. It is the conscious, thinking, decision-making part of the psyche. But it is not free. It is a mediator. Its job? To balance the id's demands, the superego's restrictions, and the external world's realities. Imagine the ego as a diplomat, trying to strike peace deals between two irrational governments, one all appetite, the other all judgment, while also managing global politics. The ego operates according to the reality principle. It delays gratification when necessary, assesses consequences, plans for the long term. But it is under constant pressure. When the id's desires are too strong, or the superego's standards are too harsh, the ego deploys defense mechanisms, which we'll explore fully in the next video. The ego's strength lies in adaptability. A healthy ego doesn't suppress the id or obey the superego blindly. It navigates, it balances, it grows. Freud's ideal was not to eliminate conflict, but to equip the ego to handle it. Modern psychology still echoes this. We now speak of emotional regulation, impulse control, executive function, all descendants of the Freudian ego. And when it fails, when the ego is overwhelmed, that's when neurosis, anxiety, and dysfunction arise. So much, then, depends on this fragile middle. Let's step back. What Freud gave us is not a diagram. It's a drama, a psychological theatre in which three players battle endlessly. The id wants pleasure. The superego demands virtue. The ego tries to survive. This model explains so much. Why we feel guilty for desires we can't help. Why we sabotage what we claim to want. Why some people seem ruled by impulse, others by guilt. It also explains cultural dynamics. Freud argued that civilization itself is built on repression. We suppress instinct to build community. The price of order is inattention. And this is where things get existential. If we're always in conflict, always negotiating between desire and duty, can we ever be truly free? Can we ever be whole? Freud was pessimistic. He believed the human psyche was a battlefield, and that peace was never permanent. But he also believed that awareness could help. To understand your inner conflicts is not to erase them, but to live with them more wisely. Freud's tripartite model has been wildly influential, but also widely challenged. Let's be honest, there's no literal id or superego in the brain. These are metaphors, and some argue they're outdated ones. Cognitive science prefers models based on neural networks and data flows. Behaviorists once dismissed the whole Freudian architecture as speculative fiction. Yet even they couldn't escape its gravity. Many modern theories echo Freud's structure in new language. Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 Fast, emotional versus slow, rational. Neuroscience distinctions between the limbic system, emotion, and prefrontal cortex, reason. Internal family systems therapy, speaking of parts of the mind that act autonomously. So Freud's basic insight, that the mind is plural, not singular, has endured. Carl Jung reinterpreted the ego as the conscious self and introduced new players, the shadow, the anima, the self. Later, theorists like Lacan reworked Freud through structuralist and linguistic lenses. And many critics, especially feminist thinkers like Juliet Mitchell and Nancy Cotterill, challenged Freud's assumptions but found his framework useful for analyzing gender, identity, and power. The id-ego-superego may be a relic of an older era, but it remains a living metaphor, because it captures something profoundly human, our divided interiority. So where does this leave us? With a different view of the self, not as a clean, unified I, but as a dynamic, conflicted system. To be human, Freud teaches, is to be split between what we want and what we should do, between who we are and who we pretend to be, between what we feel and what we allow ourselves to feel. You might not always know who's speaking inside you, the id whispering indulgence, the superego shouting shame, or the ego trying desperately to keep it all together. But to begin recognizing these voices is to begin reclaiming your freedom. Freud didn't offer an easy answer. He offered a mirror. And in that mirror, we don't see peace, we see tension. But we also see possibility. Because the ego, while embattled, is capable of growth. Through self-reflection, through therapy, through art, through life. To know yourself is not to unify the mind. It's to live wisely with its divisions. And that perhaps is the beginning of self-mastery. Curious minds never stop. Subscribe to keep exploring.